when I first started on my path in the mid to late 1960s, early 70s, I had the disadvantage. No, I had the advantage to not know that trauma, which would 14 years in the future would be listed as an incurable disorder or even a brain disease that could at best be managed with medication and with helping people change their negative thoughts. So I didn't know that was supposed to be the way things are. And so I had a very, very different experience of what happens in the body. So for example, you walk outside and you see somebody's been injured. Somebody has fallen off a bicycle and your guts twist. You got a little yuck. And then you go out and you look closer and you see he's really been injured. So you go to call 911, but your guts are still even more twisted. And so what might happen is that night, I'm not saying this is traumatic, but just as an example, that night you may be laying in bed and all of a sudden you see images of the earlier that day when the person was injured. And again, your guts twist up. Now, if that becomes chronic, the body is then telling the brain that there's threat, there's danger, there's injury, and you better watch yourself. But it's something that comes from the body. I think of this sometimes as a part of us that is also very wise, that is very cognizant, that it's not just the mind, but it's really incorporating the body. And 2 years ago, I guess it was 2 years ago, I received the last Lifetime Achievement Award from the Psychotherapy Networker. And they had a picture in the magazine at the beginning, you know, those puzzles that have a gazillion parts, like 1,000 parts. And that one part was missing. And the caption was the missing part. So I think there's now more of a recognition among people in different fields of how important the body is and how our bodies respond to threat and how our bodies can perpetuate threat and danger, even though there is no real threat or danger. So that's really how I began my work. Exactly. It can linger and linger and linger. And we can even start experiencing physical symptoms such as irritable bowel if this goes on in a chronic way. So it's like we sometimes think of it as being as trauma as being psychological, but it's very much somatic. It's very much something that registers in our body, and that we can change that. We can shift. There's a nerve that goes from the back of the brain down through the diaphragm until all of the organs below the diaphragm, particularly the gastrointestinal system, but it also goes to the heart and to the lungs. And this nerve is the largest nerve in the body. But what many people don't know is that 80% of that nerve is actually sensory. It's taking information from our guts and bringing it up back into the brain. So if our guts are twisted, we're going to feel this anguish. You know, Charles Darwin, one of my great heroes, Einstein and Darwin, he knew about this nerve and he called it the pneumogastric nerve. So pneumo, lung, gastric, gastrointestinal system. And he also realized that it was responsible, and this is really amazing how he came to this, that it's responsible for gut wrench and heartbreak. And I couldn't even add something that's more prescient or more to the point than Darwin's observation. So if we can change the signal from the viscera, from the guts, then the trauma sensations can then start to recede. So here's the example, and I'll demonstrate it, and you can do it if you want with me. So I take an easy full breath, and on the exhalation, make the sound voo, coming from the belly, as though it's coming from the belly. Well, it really is coming from the belly. And let the sound and the breath go all the way out, and then just wait for the breath to come in, filling belly and chest, and then repeat. So I'll demonstrate here. And I let the breath and the sound go all the way. Ow. And then wait for the breath to come in, filling belly and then chest. And once more. So do you want to do that with me and any of the people who are listening, watching? Yes. Yeah, it probably is weird. But the question is, does it really do something? Does it work? Does it actually do what you want it to do or need it to do? So it is weird. But if you think about it physiologically, there are these receptors in the guts, sometimes called the enteric brain or the second brain. It's a really massive network of neurons in the whole gastrointestinal system. And there are these different receptors that are signaling from our guts back up to our brain what's happening and how to be able to change that. So again, the idea is very simple, and also different kinds of sounding techniques have been used literally for thousands of years, and they probably wouldn't stick around if they weren't valid. So again, and one of the things in somatic experiencing, we try to find the person's, their curiosity, to invoke their curiosity. And so if you and your listeners, viewers are wanting to be curious about that, I'll just lead you through the exercise. And if it doesn't feel right, or it feels too hokey, or it feels maybe difficult to do, or it might be even a little bit frightening to do, to just let it go and just listen and watch as I'm doing it or as we're doing it. So are you game? Exactly. And, and we've done a fair amount of research now, with outcome studies. And the last one was published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress, which is the gold standard for trauma research. So it's not without validation. But again, but it's also possible to heal even the deepest of traumas. But sometimes it's more not just a miracle, but a hard work miracle. That's one of the reasons I enjoyed your book, because it doesn't say, well, this is the cure. This is this is going to take care of everything, because, sometimes it does, but often it takes continued work. But also knowing the physiology of the nervous system and how the vagus nerve is responsible for regulating our basic sense of goodness, of awareness, of opening to different bodily and perceptual experiences. There's been a lot of work now, or a lot of interest in psychedelics. And I think they sometimes can be valuable. But I think sometimes also one has to be cautious about their use. And that people have to be prepared for it, and there has to be follow-up. And the body is the way to prepare, the royal route to prepare for this and to follow it up. So it's not just the person is just taking this drug and then, whatever happens, happens. But unfortunately, that can be problematic. And actually in the book, I talk about this as promises and pitfalls, to really examine this and its use. And especially when we can come to the body so directly without these catalysts. So anyhow, again, what sticks is really what's happening. And having those feelings of warmth. Now, I can explain that in terms of a different parasympathetic nervous system. My very, very dear friend and colleague, Stephen Porges, if you haven't had him on, he'd be a good person to have on. And we've been very close friends for like since 1975, 1976. And he talks about three systems: the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, the shutdown system, where the vagus nerve is overactive and the guts just keep churning. And then also what he calls a social engagement system. And that should be the one that should be our default as primates and as mammals. So in other words, when we are not in fight or flight and we're not in the shutdown state, our natural impulse is to connect with others, to make eye contact, to share something together, to share a meal, to share a movie. And again, these are ways that we desire contact with others. So it's not about brute force anymore, but it's about cooperation. And cooperation comes from being open in our nervous system to that inner regulation. Usually the person will report, for example, that they're feeling pain in their shoulders. And so it's very interesting. As soon as I said those words, your shoulders went up a little bit.
You're right.
Interesting. Yeah. But the idea is what's underneath the. And somatic experiencing, one of the things that is somewhat unique about it is that it works from the bottom up, from the sensations that you were describing to our feelings, but also to our emotions, but also to our thoughts. And the idea in somatic experiencing is to work from the sensations, but also connect. So it's not that talk therapy is bad or anything, but it's limited. And it's limited to the degree that we're not able to sense and feel these things in our bodies. In somatic experiencing, it's not a therapy per se, but really what it is it's something that helps people do what they do better. So somebody who's even a talk therapist, and we've had many, many, many of our trainees came from being talk therapists. And then getting some of these tools to also work with the body greatly enhances their ability to work also with the mind. So, but just talk therapy alone without reference to the body, I think can be limited, and in any case can take a long, long time to work. Again, I'm not saying that just doing something like this is a miracle, but it really facilitates and amplifies the shifts that we're all looking for as we connect to that deeper part of ourselves. Yeah. Well, in a way, you could say trauma is a disorder of disembodiment, of dissociation from our bodies, or our bodies fragment to extremely painful situations. And those pieces are thrown asunder. So how can we bring those pieces together and hold them together in a cohesive cohesive way? So again, if we can reference, for example, sometimes people are very much in their head. And if I start working with them, it seems like there's no place to go because they don't have any reference to the body. But then we're talking, having a conversation, and something comes up, and I can see there's some excitement with the person. And I'll say, wow, it seemed like when you just told me about playing with your dog this morning, it seemed like something happened inside. Are you aware of anything that's going on right now in your body? So you just gently kind of lead the person to the body from wherever they are. I was asked to see this young man who was on the spectrum, on the autistic spectrum. And he lived up in the Bay Area, so he would come down for 4 days once a year. So when he first came down, he had his computer, and he wanted me to have my computer, and he would email me, and then I would respond with my computer. So it was almost impossible for him to actually be with another human being. And so it was about meeting him where he was, starting computer to computer, because that was where his comfort level is. And then gradually bringing people, or him, and people in general, to some reference to the body when something excites them, when something turns them on. So, example, we go out and we see that injured person, and our bodies go yuck. And if it's severe enough, our bodies stay yucked, and our bodies continue to talk to the brain and saying, "This is bad." And then the brain says it must be bad, and gets even more contracting in the body. So I think really the key is, because it's locked in the body, it's only by connecting to the body where it's coming out lately. About interoception, and interoception is the body sense. And in a number of these research studies, they said if the person can become just, not even like things like you were becoming aware of, but just their heartbeat, that it greatly improve their mental health and their physical health. One small thing. So I think this is a field now which is beginning to blossom about interoception. And you could say that this interoception is approach, the way I use it, is in healing the wounds of trauma and betrayal. It is the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, that mobilizes us for action. But then when we're feeling overwhelmed, or when, with the COVID, people had such fear of the COVID, but it's not something they could see, and it's not something they could flee from. So the one thing that they can do is shut down in the body. And this is my theory, and I've worked with a number of people, so I don't want to say that this is a proven fact, but I've worked with a number of people who have had this post-COVID, long COVID, and their body has stayed shut down. And then when we're gradually able to help them move out of shutdown, then some of the chronic fatigue becomes less, in some cases considerably less. So again, if we're in fight or flight, we're mobilized for action. If we're overwhelmed and we're shut down with freeze and collapse, then that cuts us off from connection. Well, connection to ourselves, our bodies, but connection to others. Because when you're either expecting danger, you're not going to want to engage with a person, especially if you're in a state of shutdown. You just want to get through the day. But then, if it stays stuck, then we have to work and see where it's become stuck, and then move out of it. And then sometimes say an acknowledgement, or as you did, it's like an affirmation where you said, I'm alive and I'm real. I'm alive and I'm present. Because again, that's a recognition of the importance of what happens when we begin to connect with our bodies. That we feel more present, we feel more alive, we feel more grounded, we feel more centered. And there's no greater reward. There really is no greater reward. At least that's how I see it. I mean, many people meditate. That's become more and more common. But what if you, instead of meditating on your thoughts, which is what most meditation is about, if you meditate also on your body? I was invited to Thich Nhat Hanh Center in Plum Village. It's a meditation center. And one of the things that I really had simpatico with is that most of his meditation, especially until people really became proficient at this, was what he called walking meditation. So when you're walking, you naturally connect with your body. And then so that they would do those kind of meditations, walking meditations, and then they would meet in groups of 12 or 15 underneath the plum tree, and they would share with each other, remember the social engagement system, what they were experiencing, what they were learning, how they were relating to their bodies. So again, if you're doing meditation, also try to do walking meditation and feel how your body moves in space and time. Yeah. I mean, I think bottom line is it will enrich our lives. And why not do something that enriches our lives, whether we have major trauma or not? I mean, truly, there are not many people that haven't had some wounds. I mean, the word for trauma in Greek is wound. And then the word for wound in Old German is Traum or dream. So to really find ways to enrich our lives, to stimulate our dream talk, our dream world, our dream body. You know, many people I suggest to people that they write down dreams. And because often dreams are taking us in the next direction. But taking dreams, and when I have a dream, I will actually, what I will try to do is look at pieces of the dream, parts of the dream, and then with my awareness go from the dream to what I'm experiencing in my body. So using the dream as a way to come into the body, maybe could even be called the dream body. So again, there are so many things that are enriched by body sensing, by body awareness, by interoceptive awareness, that it makes sense for everybody to practice this. And as I said, the one example of just the study with just having a person become aware of their heartbeat. I mean, without feeling their pulse, but just hearing their heartbeat, that makes a significant difference in their well-being. Just doing that. So it's something that maybe I'm being repetitious, but it can enrich all of our lives, any of our lives. And it is, I believe, the royal root in working with the effect of trauma, particularly trauma that's been on the body. Actually, one of the people who wrote the endorsements for the book, a man named Bessel van der Kolk, he said nicely, Peter is a wise and kind pioneer of somatic therapies who has been a beacon for clinicians all over the world for understanding and dealing with the physical imprints of traumatic stress. And he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And again, I think what we're seeing is, again, this used to be fringe, Dan. When I talked about this to audiences back in the 60s and 70s, I really received, it's no longer fringe. It really, with research and with different ways of connecting to our experience, I think it's now clearly a part of, maybe not completely in the mainstream, but largely now in the mainstream. Yeah. Well, I mean, there are different kinds of research. The research that I mentioned initially, which was a study that was carried out, I think it was in Israel, actually, where there was a lot of trauma. And it would just really look at the metrics for trauma. So there are different scales that you can use to measure trauma. And just doing, I believe it was like 6 sessions that they dramatically dropped the level of trauma. And this lasted for, I think, follow-up at 6 months, if I'm correct. So that's what you want to do. This is called basically an outcome study. We've done some physiological studies of what happens when people are in different states. We've done a little bit of that. We've done research on applying it to different situations. For example, for marriage and family work. And worked with children, particularly first aid, because children are always going to have their accidents, especially once they're 2 years old. They can get into all kinds of trouble. They're out on their skateboards or whatever, and they can get hurt, and they can get scared. This maybe swallowing marbles and then being rushed to the emergency room. So if the parents are able to be there with the child and support the child, be there by the child's side, maybe asking the child if it's okay for you to put your hand on their back. And then the kinds of reactions that you were just describing, Dan, that's what the children often describe. So it's, again, like I said, somatic experience is not just a therapy per se, but it's about how to multiply the effectiveness of many different approaches, many different kinds of therapies, including cognitive therapies. Yes. And that would be my deepest hope, that when we heal from ourselves, we can also help others, people who are close to us. But I think ultimately we can also begin to heal people who are further and further out in the world. And my God, if the world has never, ever needed healing, it certainly needs it now.